Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce you Fabiola Greve. Fabiola is a professor at the Federal University of Bahia in Brazil, and she works on fault tolerance. And in particular, she's going to give us a talk on her recent work on the consensus problem, which is a classical problem in fault tolerance and the advance she has made to the understanding of the problem. Fabiola, welcome to Google.
Thank you very much, Alfredo, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm glad to be here today to talk with you about fault-tolerant agreement problems, and especially the consensus problem, which is a very important problem on the design of reliable distributed systems. These are consensus problems and agreement problems that are at the heart of the development of many reliable middleware that we are aware of, that we have, as for example, group communication service, transaction servers, reliable servers, what else? And in the context of peer-to-peer networks, for example, if consensus is being used for maintaining data consistency. So these problems are they are well known to the dependability community. We have a lot of solutions to solve for them, but these solutions are able or are interested for a classical network of wired networks or static servers. But when we want to solve these problems in this modern context of mobile networks or overlay networks, dynamic networks, we have a lot of problems. So the community is still trying to understand them, is still trying to provide some good definitions and to find good models, adequate models to solve these problems in this environment. So today I'm going to present to you some of our results concerning these abstractions, which are necessary and sufficient to solve consensus. So this is, in fact, a joint work with my colleague from France, Sébastien Tixoya. And I divided my talk in 4 parts. First of all, I will define consensus and the abstractions that have been proposed in order to solve it. Consensus in a non-classical context of self-organizing systems gains the name of FTCUP, fault-tolerant consensus with unknown participants. And after that, I will give you our main results, which are the statement of sufficient and necessary conditions for solving FTCUP. And finally, I will conclude and give you some research perspectives. So first of all, let us define our model. We are placed in distributed systems composed of a set pi of n processes. A correct process is active during the whole computation, otherwise it is faulty, and a fault process will not recover anymore. Among the n process, f process can be fault, and n minus f will be correct. So processes will communicate by reliable channels, which means that messages cannot be lost. If we have 2 correct processes, PI and PJ, if PI sends a message M to PJ, PJ is going to receive this message. So we are placed in this context of self-organized systems, which are characterize the mobile ad-hoc networks, the sensor networks, unstructured peer-to-peer systems, overlay networks, what else? And these systems are highly dynamic, which means that nodes can join and leave the system as they wish, they desire. And also these processes are placed into nodes which can move around, so the system can be mobile. And there is no central authority which will feed processes with global context information, which will give information about the whole network topology and the whole composition of the system. So the system is self-organizing. And it is also asynchronous, which means that we make no assumptions concerning the relative speed of processes, nor on the message transfer delays. So in a classical context of known networks, everybody knows everybody. Everybody can communicate with everybody. So we can consider that the set of processes pi and its cardinality n is known by everybody. And the communication graph normally is, we consider that it is complete. And partitions, if they ever happen, they are temporary, which means that the graph is always connected. And the knowledge graph, the knowledge that the peers, the nodes have of the others is complete. Everybody knows each other. But in a self-organizing context of unknown networks, the composition and localization of the peers is really a concern, which means that the best that a process can have is a partial knowledge about the system composition. So a process can only send messages to peers that it knows, and it knows only a partial set of the system. And in this sense, we can consider that the communication graph is dynamic. It's dynamic because the system is also dynamic, and nodes can move. And the knowledge graph cannot be complete anymore. And also, the edges are not bi-direction. So we have a direction graph, which is not complete, and it can be dynamic. So this is the model that we use to work with our problem. So the consensus problem, as we said, is a fundamental problem, and it can help, in fact, peers to deal with the high dynamism, the self-organizing nature of the system in order to take consistent actions. So, but what is the consensus? In fact, consensus allows process to agree on actions in the system. So process will propose a value, and they will decide for a unique value according to some properties, which are the agreement property, no two correct processes decide different values. Termination, every correct process will eventually decide for the same value, and validity, the decided value is the proposed value. So, how can we solve consensus? In fact, unfortunately, consensus cannot be solved in any synchronous systems, even in a classical network of known peers. This is known as the FLP impossibility result. This is a fundamental result. And in presence of even one single crash, we cannot solve consensus. And the community has proposed a lot of abstractions in order to deal with this impossibility result. And one of the main, the most interested or elegant abstractions is the abstraction of unreliable failure detectors, which are, in fact, the idea is to feed the system and to enrich the system with some degree of synchrony in order to solve the problem of consensus. So the unreliable failure detectors are detectors that will give hints about failures in the system. So a process can consult a failure detector, and it will give a list of of process suspected of being fault. And these hints can be unreliable. The unreliable failure detector can make mistakes. So it can suspect that a correct process is crashed, or that a crash process is correct. Okay? And based on the accuracy of this information, we will have some classes of failure detector. Among these classes, we are interested in these three here. So the perfect failure detectors are the ones which cannot make mistakes. They are perfect. So the only way to implement failure detectors which are perfect is if we have a synchronous system. The other two, they are unreliable. So the Diamond S failure detector, eventually strong failure detector, it can make an arbitrary a number of mistakes until a point in time in which, after which, some correct process is never suspected by all the processes in the system. Another failure detector is the leader detector. In this detector, in fact, it will give hints about a process identity. And there will be a point in time in which the same correct process is going to be given by the leader detector. The same identity of correct process to all the processes in the systems. The good thing is that these detectors, diamond S and omega, they are equivalent. They have been proven to be equivalent. And they can solve consensus. And they, in fact, represent the weakest conditions, synchronous conditions, able to solve consensus in asynchronous systems. But as soon as the majority of processes is correct in the system. So if we have an asynchronous system enriched with these detectors, we can solve consensus. And the good side effect of this strategy is that, in fact, the protocols that we conceive to solve consensus are indulgent toward the failure detector, which means that the failure detector can be unreliable, they can make a lot of mistakes, and whatever it behaves, the consensus keeps the safety properties, which means that the consensus will not decide without agreement. And also, the interesting thing is that we can also solve uniform consensus as well, which means that processes which decide either they are crash or correct, they will decide for the same value. So, in the context of unknown networks, the consensus has been redefined for a cup, which means consensus with unknown participants. And in fact, this is the same, keeps the same consensus definition, and it adds the assumption that there is no global knowledge about the system composition and its cardinality. And these authors, Kevin, Sasson, and Chipper, they have provided solutions in order to solve this problem in a fail-free environment. And after that, they had, afterwards, they had started the problem in a fail-prone environment, and they called it FT-cup, fault-tolerant consensus. And the uniform version of cup is the uniform FT-cup. So how can we solve this cup in unknown networks? So, in fact, the synchrony assumptions that are sufficient to solve consensus in a classical environment are no longer sufficient to solve the problem in an unknown network. It is necessary to enrich the system now with some more information, some more hints, and in this case, hints about the participants in the systems or about the connectivity of the system. And in this sense, the same authors have been provided the abstraction of participant detectors. So this the participant detectors, the same as the failure detectors, they are distributed oracles in the systems that will give hints about the peers which are in the system, the peers that participate in the computation. And this information is partial, and it is accurate. And also, it is no decreasing over time, which means that if the participant tells that somebody is there, this guy is really there, and this information is non-decreasing.
But what if the guy fails?
It doesn't matter for the abstraction of participant detector. If it detects that the guy was there, the guy was there. So it is a knowledge relationship. So I know that the guy was there. If it was there and it was not there, it moves. I'm not concerned with this. It's only a knowledge relationship. okay? So the information given by these distributed oracles are going to enrich the system with a knowledge connectivity graph, okay? And based on the properties of this graph, we have some classes of participant detectors. Okay, so with this abstraction, these authors, Kevin and Sesson and Chipper, they found necessary and sufficient conditions in order to solve CUP in a known network. But they started the problem in a fail-free scenario. Afterwards, they started the problem with the presence of faults. And they found that in order to solve the problem with the same minimal connectivity conditions that they found to solve CUP, it is necessary to enrich the system with the stronger synchrony assumptions, which are represented by the perfect failure detector. So, in fact, what they do is to their result is that for solving the problem in a self-organizing network, dynamic network, with the minimal connectivity requirements, it is necessary to enrich the system with the stronger synchrony requirements. The problem here is that this kind of systems that we are considering are not able to be implemented in a synchronous system. Their models are not synchronous. This competes with the self-organizing and dynamic nature of these networks. So it's not so really possible to implement a perfect failure detector in this kind of systems. And another point is that they cannot solve uniform FTCUP. In fact, they proved that even with this stronger condition, it's not possible to solve the uniform version of consensus. So the question that we raised was, is that possible to solve the problem even the consensus problem in a synchronous systems with the dynamic characteristics and mobility and self-organizing characteristics. In fact, it is possible, and these are our main contributions. What we do is to try to analyze the problem in order to see if it was possible to have more conditions, stronger conditions concerning the connectivity aspects, and in order to weaken the synchrony requirements for solving the problem. So the idea was is it possible to use the same minimal synchrony requirements to solve consensus in order to solve FTCUP? And in fact, we found that it is possible, and we solved this problem with the minimal synchrony requirements, which are represented by the failure detectors Diamond S and Omega. And an interesting side effect is that we can solve also the uniform version of consensus. Why we can do this? Because we use a constructive approach in which we reduce the problem, the FTCUP problem, to a consensus problem which has the same conditions, the same characteristics of a classical consensus. And in that case, we can reuse any classical indulgent consensus that we are aware of. And for this, we must enrich the system with more stronger connectivity conditions. And these are represented by a participant detector of the class k-OSR. So let me show you which are the characteristics of this participant detector. So this participant is sufficient and necessary to solve FTCUP in a consensus in a synchronous environment with the minimal synchrony conditions known. So the k-OSR participant detector, it generates a graph which has the following characteristics. The graph is connected. This is a primary concern for solving any forms of any type of reliable problem. And the graph, if we reduce it to its k strongly connected components, this graph will have only one sink. And if you consider two components, if there is a path from one component to the other, then there will be k paths from one component to the other. Let me illustrate this better with the aid of this example, okay? So here we have a 2OSR graph. This graph has 3 components, and each one of the components is 2 strongly connected, which means that there is at least 2 node joint paths between n pairs of process into each one of the components. Moreover, if we have a path from one component to the other, we will have 2 paths. And we have only one sink, which means that processes which are in the sink can see themselves, but they cannot see the other process in the graph. And the other process in the graph, inside the other components, they can see themselves and some of the other process in the graph. But all of them are able to see all the processes in the sink. Okay? So with this graph, we can solve consensus. How can we do this? So this is one of our results. In fact, the participant detector of the k-OSR class is sufficient for solving FTCup in spite of F crashes. And as soon as we enrich the system with a failure detector, an unreliable failure detector, and as soon as a majority of processes is correct in the sink. So how can we prove this theorem here? To prove it, we have to give you the algorithms that you found in order to solve FTCup. So have you an idea how to solve this problem, how to solve consensus with a graph with these characteristics? Have you guys any idea on how can I
solve consensus in the sink?
Yeah, that is it. I reduced the problem to
But how do you communicate back the results to people who are not in the sink if they cannot hear back from the sink?
It's easy because I know the other processes in the sink. Oh, I know some of the other processes which are not in my component. And for sure, I know the other processes in the sink. So I will just send messages to all the processes which I know, and I will have the decision afterward. Okay?
But I thought that the sink was characterized because you cannot communicate outside the sink.
No, you can. Let me show you the algorithms. So for solving consensus, I have to know who is in the sink. I have to determine who is in the sink. But to determine this, I will run a collect algorithm, which is going to be to do a sort of breadth first search in the graph to determine a maximal set of reachable nodes in the graph. And after that, I will be able to run any sort of consensus that I know, that I have. And here, for doing these algorithms, for running it, I will carry the participant detector. And for running the classical consensus, I will carry the failure detector. So let us show you how can we do the collect. So first of all, note that this is a graph which has been created by a k-OSR participant detector. So if you are process P1, for example, the first thing that we should do is to carry your participant detector to know which are the guys that this participant knows. So in this case, P1 is going to know, the participant detector is going to return these 3 processes, okay? And this graph, if you see, P2, for example, the participant detector of P2 knows P1, P3, and also P4, and so else, okay? So this is the graph that we have formed in the system on the start of the consensus algorithm. So after that, what process P1 is going to do? He knows that this process knows other guys. So he's going to inquire with this process about their knowledge. And these processes are going to give back their knowledge. So P2 is going to say, I know P4, and P1, P3. P8 is going to say, I know P11, P10, and P3. No, I know P11 and P10, and so else. So we do, in fact, a sort of breadth first search in the graph. We can see that the protocol runs in rounds, and in each round, we are going to discover the processes that are distant at level R. So in round 1, we have the processes that are distant at level 1. In round 2, the processes that are distant at 2, and in round 3, and so on, until we have found all the processes that are reachable in the system. So all the processes are going to do this to run this collect algorithm. So the processes which are in G1 are going to see or to be aware about the existence of all the processes in the graph, okay? In all the other components. Processes which are in G2, for example, they are only able to see themselves and processes which are in the sink. And processes which are in the sink are only able to see themselves. Okay, so now we can run the sink algorithms. So at the beginning, each process is going to run collect. Yes. Yes.
If the communication link, for example, between P2 and P4 is unidirectional, how is P4 going to ever answer?
This is not the communication. That's the point. This is the knowledge. P2 knows that P4 exists. For sure, he knows because P4 has communicated with it.
Right, but at the time P4 communicated to P2, P4 also knows that P2 exists, right?
Yeah, but in this model, we don't use this information. We could use, but we don't use. Okay? The only information that we use is the knowledge. You are right. Okay? But yeah? In fact, if you consider, how can we implement a participant detector? For example, if we are in a mobile ad hoc network, we can make use of the local broadcasting facility. So at the beginning, everybody is going to broadcast their identity. So I will broadcast my identity. So you know me, and he knows me, but perhaps that he doesn't know me. But I don't know that you know me. You see, I communicate with you, but I don't know who are the guys which have received my broadcast. You see?
Yeah, but then you know,
so if you consider this graph, P4 has on the broadcast, and P2 has received it. Okay?
That's right.
And this is unidirectional. Because
but at the time you are constructing the graph,
yes,
right, P2 must have had the answer from P4. for the graph to be constructed. So at the moment you are
Yes.
building the graph, you are actually assuming that everybody answers that, right?
Yeah, no. In this case, I just broadcast my identity. Okay? I don't know who are the guys who is going to receive my identity. Okay? I can receive the identity of P2 as well, but in this case, I didn't receive. Perhaps I'm not in a good level of the terrain, you see? So,
so you could build this graph by just listening to broadcasts.
Yeah, that's it. I can do this. Okay? But you are right. There is a correlation between knowledge and communication, which we are not exploring in this model, but we could explore this. We could do this. Yeah. So now, to run the Sink algorithm, you just run collect. You got a partial view of the system. Each one of the PI processes are going to do this. And after that, they are going to inquire again the process that they know, which are in their its partial view. So if all of the processes share the same PI set that you, except for those who are fault, you can ensure that you have the same view of the system. And in this case, you are in the sink. Okay? You can, for sure, you can deduce that you are in the sink. Otherwise, you cannot deduce that you are in the sink. Notice that if you are not in the sink, let me come back here. For example, this process, they are not in the sink, okay? And they will have knowledge. They will have the process that it inquire in its component will share the same view of it. But this process will not going to share the same view of it. So this process is going to receive at least one response, because there is some correct process here. So at least one response from this process he will receive. And in this case, this condition is not going to be satisfied. So the only way for this condition to be satisfied is for the process in the sink. Okay? So now we are done. We can run. If we are in the sink, we can run any classical consensus that we know. And for this, we are going to carry the failure detector. And after that, we are just broadcast the decision to everybody that we know. And finally, we are going to decide. These are for the processes which are in the sink, the active process. Those which are passive, they are just going to wait and ask for the decision to every node in its partial view. So they are going to broadcast this inquire, and they are going to wait for the response. So we are done. Okay? So now let us show you that this, in fact, this k-OSR participant detector is also necessary to solve the problem. So in fact, it has the minimal conditions, knowledge connectivity conditions, in order to solve FTCAP in a asynchronous system with the assumptions that we gave. So the participant detector k-OSR is necessary to solve FTCAP in spite of F-faults. So how can we prove this? In fact, it's not so difficult. We can make a proof by contradiction. We can assume that we have an algorithm that solves FTCAP without a graph k-OSR. If the graph is not k-OSR, we have two conditions. Either there is less than k node joint paths between two components, and in this case, if F process crash, K minus 1 can be F. So we can disconnect the graph, and we are not able to get to the decision. And another possibility is that there is more than one sink in the graph, in the system. What happens if we have more than one sink in the system? Can we decide with agreement in this case? What will happen? Can you try to make this proof for me? No? Look, here in this graph, I have two sinks, okay? And each one of the processes in this sink has a value, a violet ball as a value. And on the other sink, we have a green ball as a value, okay? Notice that for consensus to be solved, we must satisfy the termination property, the validity property, and the agreement property. And suppose that these processes, they are going to solve consensus, so they must satisfy these properties. So for the termination property, they are going to decide. One day, they are going to decide. Suppose that they decide at time t1. And suppose that this process decides at time t2. Okay? For the validity property, they are going to decide a value that it is proposed by themselves. Okay? And here, it's the same. But,
Why is that? Because they can communicate. I mean, the graph is the knowledge graph, right?
Yes.
Maybe they can communicate and they know what each other propose.
They only know themselves. They are not aware about the others. Here is the same. They only know themselves. They are not aware about the others. But the others are aware about them. For example, suppose that these guys communicate with them. Okay? But they can pass their values. But we are in a proof. Okay? So we are going to postpone this communication until a time t greater than t1 and t2. Look, one important thing to know is that we are in an asynchronous system. So we don't know when a message is going to arrive, okay? The channels are reliable. We have a correct process here. They are going to pass their value, but we don't know when. So suppose that this happens before the time they decide, okay? So in this case, they are going to decide because they have to terminate. They are going to decide for their own value, the green value, because they have to satisfy the validity. Here is the same, but in fact, at the time that they decide, the other processes could not communicate with them. So they are going to pass by their decision, or they are going to decide at different values, and the agreement is going to be violated. That's it. So with this, this concludes my talk. So what we have presented is the necessary sufficient conditions in order to solve FTCAP. In our work, we have investigated other classes of participant detectors, like as, for example, the K-connectivity, which is necessary, and the K-strong connectivity, which is sufficient. This participant detectors gives rise to only a graph with only one component. In this case, we have a K strongly connected component, and here we have a K connected component. So we proved that it is possible to solve FTCAP and with the minimal synchrony requirements which are necessary to solve the problem in a classical context. We also show you how to solve the problem with protocols which are indulgent. So we found an indulgent protocol to solve the problem because we reuse classical consensus. And some perspectives of research. In fact, we are currently studying the problem of consensus, FT-cup, in a Byzantine model in which we consider that the peers can be malicious. This is very interested for example, using this problem in a peer-to-peer network for solving problems like as the reputation problem, for example. And one of the weaknesses of our solutions or of our algorithms is that this consensus that we have proposed are not indulgent toward the participant detector, which means that if the graph that the system form does not belong to the k-OSR class, we cannot ensure the agreement or determination of the consensus. So consensus is good only if the graph that is generated by the system has the good properties. And this is a real challenge to propose a consensus in this context which are indulgent toward the participant detector class. Another point is concerning the participant detector. How can we implement these guys in a practical setting? How can we compare also the different classes and to see if they are complementary or equivalent, etc., etc. So we have these perspectives that we are investigating now. And this concludes my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.